as noisy as ever.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon and welcome. It's so lovely to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming back. I'm Prof. I'm the Director of Advancement for the Faculty of Engineering, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Professor Larry Smith, who almost doesn't need any introduction. After all, his TED Talk, Why You Will Fail to Have a Great Career, has more than 7.3 million views. That TED Talk is classic Larry, funny, blunt, and accurate. Larry is beloved here on campus, as you can see by the full room today. He is a professor of economics and a born storyteller. He's an expert in entrepreneurship and innovation, and he is in no small way partly responsible for much of the entrepreneurial culture here at the university. In fact, Larry's latest contribution to our entrepreneurial ecosystem is his founding of the Problem Lab, which is a crucial component of solving. Share his thoughts with us today about generative AI and tomorrow's economy. So strap yourselves in. You're about to be entertained, educated by the incomparable Professor Larry Smith, who is currently in his, wait for this, 129th academic term on campus.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It is certainly my pleasure to be with you. I have never entered a classroom wanting to be anywhere else, and that remains true to this day. We're going to talk about the effect of generative, which is mislabeled, by the way, AI's effect on the economy. And it's a, as you can see from the overhead, not a new idea. That handwritten 1968 is referring to the original creation of the cartoon, which is there. And no, I did not start teaching in 1968. Let us not make it worse than it is, as it turns out. But that has been used in several decades worth of classes. So not a new idea, although the question would become, has its moment arrived? Obviously, that is the main topic that we will discuss this afternoon. Having thought about it for 40 years, I do have something to say about it. However, but in order to look at the effect on the economy, I want to do a quick review of economic activity. So we set the stage, and then we're going to look at the effect of artificial intelligence on our economy. So I'd like to begin, of course, by taking a quick review of those economic issues that I did not include in my previous courses. Yes, quite right, none. It gives me no satisfaction whatsoever to say that since I've been in the classroom for 129 academic terms, the state of economics has barely moved. Other disciplines move. Some disciplines move slowly and some disciplines move quickly, but it's hard to discover that economics has moved in any way, because I'm not wedded to those ideas I started teaching when I arrived here. If I have evidence and logic to persuade me that there is a better economic theory, I would be tickled, pink, and overjoyed. It turns out we still have to rely on the old standbys. Economics does not have a reliable way to explain how growth should be stimulated. So if the government of Canada says, how should we stimulate the growth of the Canadian economy, economics does not have a coherent answer. We have like 50,000 answers, all of which are old, and most of them are which are completely discredited. We have no guidance to be able to tell you how we would have a more equitable distribution of income. We have no answer for that question either. We also don't know whether are we in favor of monopolies, or are we opposed to monopolies, or what should government do about monopolies. So we've been discussing this for like 100 years, still with no conclusion. Meanwhile, governments bumble along forward, because we have very little to say to them except in emergencies. And of course, we have enough emergencies, so the court still works. The fact that the court still works because of our ability to respond to emergencies is actually chilling. And I'm not being funny. That I'm standing here telling you this is like a nightmare to be able to say after this length of time, I have nothing new to say. Well, that's not strictly speaking true, but not new theory to advance to you, because I would do it. Like, I'm dedicated, determined to have an economically literate society, and of course the wave of misinformation has never been higher. So in this battle for economic literacy, I'm losing ground. Society and humanity is losing ground on this issue in any event. So what's been happening since I last talked to you? Well, the economy. So let's see. Okay, we had the dot-bomb fiasco. Maybe that was that enthusiasm for the internet as it was put in place. Maybe some of that fiasco was understandable because it was so new and nobody knew what they were doing, the both public and the private sector. However, by the time we got to, excuse me, to 2008-9, and we have a financial fiasco administered by caused by a lack of regulation in the United States. So now we have a completely unnecessary financial crisis that is global and risks destabilizing the global economy. And so there is a genuine classic emergency. And of course, what do we do when there's an emergency? To whom do we look in an emergency? We, of course, look for our hero. Don't break my heart. We look to our hero. Government. No. Oh, you're lucky I don't do a pop quiz. Our hero, Lord Keynes. My goodness. Yes, he's, yeah. Oh, sorry, every few years someone announces my hero, Lord Keynes, and I have made no bones that I'm a Keynesian economist, and we labeled what we did in the classroom as Keynesian economics. And I have no reason to change my mind about it. I would have liked to if Keynes had been superseded by somebody smarter than he, notwithstanding that he's been dead for so friggin' long period of time. It doesn't change the fact that every time there's an emergency, we run back to the comfort of our hero, Lord Keynes, who said what government should do is lean against the trend of the marketplace. And so, of course, the central bankers following Keynesian economics, matrix masters and chief priests that they are, responded, in fact, to pour money into the system to right the balance in 08-09. And of course, it works, and government's deficit rose at 08-09, and interest rates, of course, fell very, very sharply. And there are people in this room who, while they were not responsible for engineering this financial fiasco, have profited from it considerably. Mortgages at 2% per year. Don't you look at me and complain about affordable housing when your house was given to you as a gift by the central bankers of Canada while dealing with some other problem that was not yours, and just they gave you money. Yes, they did give you money, so let us be very careful. Recognize, of course, that all of your children will, of course, require money for the down payments for their houses, so sooner or later you will not be as well off as you actually thought you were from those 2% mortgage rates. Sorry, that's just the truth. Now, of course, the central bankers don't like these low interest rates. But then for a whole bunch of other reasons, economic growth was relatively slow coming out of 08-09. In other words, the damage to economic confidence and the financial structure was actually greater than was expected. And notwithstanding those low interest rates, inflation stayed low and growth was still tolerable. And every time the central banks tried to take interest rates back to normal, you guys all got spooked. And then they struggled to raise them. This means that after 08-09, as we move forward, we're going to get to contemporary time in a moment, but as we move forward, we are in this interesting position where interest rates are, the last time they were this low, this long, was 400 years ago. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, a 400-year-old pre-industrial society had interest rates that were this ridiculously low in the absence of even a banking system. So my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, there's something highly peculiar about that. And the central banks are much agitated about this, keeping in mind that the primary central banks do not directly report to the governments in the countries in which they are. So now, just as the central banks are starting to get interest rates back to normal, so you actually have to pay for a mortgage, or your, in this case, some of your children have to pay, like, actually mortgages. So it's kind of like the turning of the wheel. So when you were young, you were paying off your mortgage and 2% was okay. And now you're old and you actually want to have guaranteed deposit certificates at the bank that pay something. So now you want the cycle to turn. You older, yes, well, I was thinking greedy, but, and by the way, I'm an old man, so I can talk about old men. Nobody else who isn't an old man should make a reference to that. Wait till we get to the US presidential election. However, as the central bankers are trying to get the system back to normal, as it must actually go back to normal, interest rate, you can't have mortgages at 2% indefinitely. That is simply unsustainable, and you should remember that unsustainability is a bad word for an economist. The policy should always be the highest sustainable rate of growth, and sustainable means exactly what it sounds like. There is nothing that we can see that would interrupt it, and 2% interest rates for mortgages would interrupt it. Has to interrupt it, sooner or later. And just as central bankers are trying to get everything back to normal, you decide to have a global pandemic. Well, I'm sorry, it's a public health emergency. If you want a completely unexpected development to destabilize the whole world, at least this wasn't a financial fiasco that was unnecessary. So we end up with a public health emergency. And of course, the economy is now going to struggle. Well, naturally, it's going to struggle. How could it not struggle? So it's going to struggle. And naturally, of course, we go back to our hero, Lord Keynes. So finally got the... God, I think you're doing that just to, so if you have a heart attack here, no, guy, you shouldn't be tormenting me. So we go back to Keynes, so the central banks create money, interest rates go down again because they weren't supposed to go down, but now we've got a public health emergency, governments pour money into the system, and they write it. So they did what they were supposed to do. So they fixed the economy, stabilized it, just like the course notes say is supposed to happen, because of course, you also know that as interest rates fall, and there's this huge expansion of money, what's going to happen? Something bad is going to happen. What we're going to end up with is inflation. So of course we have inflation. So of course, so the ignorant mob says, oh my God, inflation. Well, how can you be surprised about, the sun is rising in the east, pleasant sets in the west. Let us not get overly excited about, physics, or it's almost as dependable as physics. So the rate of inflation, rises sharply. What you would expect to have happen. Now, it rose sharply more to an unexpected degree for a ridiculously simple reason, because we had a whole bunch of unprecedented things all happening at the same time. First, we now have a true global economy, so this is the first global fiasco. And the problem is that the supply chains have never been tested. We have global supply chains. We've never tested their robustness. Well, we're testing them now. And they're way less robust than we assumed. If you pore through your course notes, which I'm sure you still have, you would discover that when we talked about the Japanese just-in-time inventory system, which is a precursor to the global supply chains, we pointed out that the absence of holding inventories was an economic benefit. That's a good thing. Having production sitting there where nobody buying it is using scarce capital. We'd also pointed out that as the inventories fall, the buffer stocks fall. And if anything goes wrong, you can bring the global manufacturing process to a halt. That's exactly what happened. They were way less robust than expected. The pandemic has differential effects around the world. There are different policy effects on top of everything else. So production is affected. And that as the economy is starting to revive, it only slowly comes back. So, of course, up goes inflation. At the same time, of course, we will have a conventional war in Europe that will destabilize our food and energy markets. Oh, yes. Welcome to your world. So the abnormal increase. Oh, and the other thing, of course, that is peculiar here that affects why the central banks miscalculated the rate of inflation and miscalculated how severe it would be is the result, of course, that their models, my beloved mathematical models of the economy, started not working properly. And why didn't they work? Because we didn't have historic data. We've never had a global supply chain that was tested. So we don't actually have parameters for it. We have not had a public health emergency with a modern economy. The last public health emergency equivalent was the flu epidemic of 1918, which is, strictly speaking, not applicable to the complex economy we now have. So the mathematical models, which work actually quite well, most of the time they work well, they have a range of error, but it's actually relatively narrow and gives a decent guidance. Well, the only problem with all of that was you've lost historic benchmarks. You know, there's nothing more chilling than facing a difficult situation and someone says to you, there is no precedent. Because you can't rely on the past. You can't rely on, there's no knowledge to rely on because the lessons we learned in the past aren't applicable to the particular situation we have at this time. Of course, as the textbooks make clear, as our hero Lord Keynes makes clear, I don't say the textbooks, I mean all the textbooks, there's nothing peculiar going on here at all. There's no mystery about how you bring inflation down, is there? This is where you all mature people acknowledge there is no mystery about it. You raise interest rates. Now, of course, they did want to raise interest rates anyway before the pandemic. So now, of course, but now they have to raise them to rein in inflation, which, as you can plainly see, works. Works. I mean, it works. So inflation's coming down. It's not where they want it to be yet. They want it to be where you ignore it. And you had, by the way, previous to the pandemic, we had had about 15 years of stable prices at about 2%. The golden age, where the rate is so low, you don't think about it. Therefore, you don't react to it, and if you don't react to it, then it's fine. Like if you didn't react to 5, 5 would be fine, but you do react to 5. So, 3-ish now. We got another % to come down. And of course, they want to be persuaded, those nasty bankers. They want to be persuaded that it's down and going to stay down. How would they persuade themselves it was down and was going to stay down? By watching it stay down. Like, really, that's not it. By watching it stay down. So for those of you who are hoping, or your children are hoping, for those 2% mortgages coming back quickly, the stock market, in its own version of fantasy land, because stocks are priced for everything to unfold perfectly. With a raging war, which a conventional war in Europe, the Middle East highly unstable, with its own conflicts raging there, well, and everything's going to turn out just fine. And interest rates about to come down any moment now. So why should there be effect on corporate earnings? Yes, all right. Yeah, well, get around to that in due course. Now, the effect, of course, on that raising interest rates to bring down the rate of inflation is, of course, to affect the rate of growth. And, of course, as you know, it does not stimulate, high interest rates don't stimulate growth. Excuse me. And so that's the GDP, real corrected for inflation, of course, as it must be. And then those are the quarterly numbers. Chain $9, of course, it's just correct. It's the method used to correct for inflation. And as you can see, we have not actually had an official recession, but Canada's just basically holding its own. Boom. Within the statistical norms, that's basically dead steady. So no growth. Now, no growth is a big deal for Canada, because normally we grow at about the same rate the United States does. So no growth is, from our point of view, really slow, not surprising given the interest rates. And of course, the rate of inflation is reflecting the slow growth. So far, so good. And what's happening in the excited states of America? Besides the fact that they do not have a functioning government, they have no semblance of what a budget is. Like Canada has a budget. You know, you may not like the budget of the government of Canada, but it's actually, it's real. It does actually measure, the numbers are correct. It is basically the roadmap the government is pursuing, for better or worse. But at least it's there, it's clear, you can look it up, and you know what your government is trying to do and what its targets are for the next couple of years. The United States, if you're a US investor, business owner, employee, or retiree, You do not have that option since they haven't had effective budgets for at least 10 years. And now, of course, there's an election underway, which means even less takes place than normally. Sorry. So, right now, the US economy is growing quite strongly, uncharacteristically, because its interest rates are still relatively high, haven't come down significantly, but unlike us, they're growing quite respectable rate. Well, you know why, ladies and gentlemen. Because everything is always better in America. They work harder, they're more productive, they're less conservative, they're less generally dopey. All of which are partly true, by the way. But there's one very clear reason why the US economy is growing so sharply. Now, by the way, it's helping us because, of course, it stimulates our exports and prevents that Canadian growth from being lower than otherwise would be the case. It is helpful if your largest customer is actually growing, right? It's seriously helpful. But why is it growing? You might ask, why is it growing? Because it's such a powerful effect on the Canadian economy. And then is always that S word in your mind. Is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? That's a good word. Is it sustainable? Right? I'm an old guy, so you might wonder why I care about sustainability, since I don't have a lot of more sustained time available. But see, you know, I care about all the young faces who are going to live in the future that I am not going to see. So it's going to turn out the way I predict in a few minutes, but never mind that little detail. So why is it growing? Because the US government has chosen, in its generally chaotic fashion, to administer a massive Keynesian stimulation to its economy. So, well, on one hand, they want inflation to come down, and the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is trying to make that happen. The Congress of the United States, which is of a mind, well, it doesn't have a mind, it is generally in favor of two things that are mutually incompatible: low taxes and high military spending, and then to justify high military spending, basically high spending. So the US federal government is currently running a deficit, not a debt, deficit, of just under 7% of GDP. That's friggin' massive. That is a massive stimulus to the economy. So of course it's growing. Of course it's growing. The Federal Reserve is trying to cope with this. So that's why significant reductions in interest rates from the Federal Reserve is unlikely in the short term. They might, pre-election, do a little symbolic cut to confuse the common folk. But it basically will be symbolic and not actually have a real effect. Because the danger is, because of that massive stimulating of the US economy. Fortunately, there's a lot of idle labor in America, which they've been able to bring into the economy so that inflationary pressure did not rise as great as they could. But it is not sustainable, even for a country as rich as America, to spend almost 7% of its GDP, overspend an amount more than 7% of its GDP. Now, of course, its debt level is already high because it's been doing this for some time. Fiscal, you know, the Congress wants low taxes and high spending, low taxes and high spending. This began with the cowboy president, Ronald Reagan. And so here we are, a policy which just continues, and therefore the federal debt of the government of the United States stands at about 124% of GDP, like more than 1 year's worth of output. Now, of course, as you know, Canada also is running a deficit, and Canada also has, you know, a highly indebted government. Oh, not compared to America. Not compared to, oh, we're Canadians. We're about as boring. We can't even do aggressive deficit spending emphatically. We can't do anything emphatically. So your government your federal government is running a deficit that's about 1.4% of GDP. There's a rather difference between 1.4% and almost 7%. And yes, the federal government of Canada also has a debt, as does the US government. And ours is standing at about 42 to 45%. Less than half the US debt burden. So, dopey, boring Canadians. Still better off than America with respect to sustainability. The U.S. ability to do this indefinitely is questionable. And therefore, our larger customers, our largest single export market, is at somewhat risk to us, collaterally, never mind, of course, to the damage they might inflict on themselves. So, before I turn to AI, I want to look at one last commanding issue. Because I remember what I've said in these classrooms. I presented the creation of the global economy as an exceptionally positive event for humanity. I said, and I'm not about to change my mind on this point at least, that there should be no reason why any person on earth should be unable to offer his or her talent anywhere in the world. That is about productivity, is about respecting the talent of every person on this tiny little chunk of rock circling around the sun in this obscure part of the Milky Way. I cannot believe in a world where the productive value of any person is interfered with, disrespected, or diminished. And the people at the end of World War II, having coped with oceans of blood, with more people dead than we count. We simply don't know how many people have died in World War II, since so many civilians were incinerated, bombed, with no remains left. And they thought, this is outrageous. This must stop. And so the plan was very clear. A farsighted, strategic, courageous politicians. Yes, I know, sounds like an oxymoron, does it not? But the horror of World War II focused their attention. Yes, and our hero, Lord Keynes, was one of the leaders in this movement, by the way, which does not affect my opinion of the movement. It affects my opinion of him. So, we should trade with each other. We'll reverse 100 years of economic policy, which was interfere with trade among countries. Reverse it. And then, and begin the slow dismantling of the barriers of trade among countries. And then, the last strategically focused president of the United States, there hasn't been any since, is of course Richard Nixon. That he is the last strategically focused president should make your blood run cold. Because he was. Because he actually had a brain. Yes, he was a criminal and a bigot and a bunch of other things that were really reprehensible. But it does not change the fact that on two key issues facing our planet, he made the right decision. One, it is outrageous that a country the size of China is disconnected from the global economy and is currently, as it was at the time, living effectively at the standard of living of the friggin' Middle Ages as a courtesy of the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong. So this old communist, anti-communist warrior, Richard Nixon, abandoned everything he'd ever said before, flew off to China and said, come in out of the cold. Mao Zedong is senile by this stage of the game, and the ancient beds surrounding him. I can barely believe I'm going to say this. We're radical. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? Old men can be radical in the right set of circumstances, believing that China's current state at the end of the Cultural Revolution, which had taken this great, talented people and reduced it to barely able to feed itself, was an offense to Chinese pride. And if this means they've got to do business with the great Satan, then so be it. And the old Chinese men welcomed Richard Nixon, who was relatively young compared to them. And then the second thing was to believe that the nuclear arsenals of the Soviet Union and the United States, which are capable of killing humanity several times over, that needs to be addressed. So the other great adversary will persuade the leadership of the Soviet Union to begin to dismantle the nuclear arsenal. And America was prepared to do the same. I would think you would call that a historic insight. And he made it happen. So, under Tricky Dicky, they began a staged reduction in the number both of the weapons and their delivery systems. They didn't make them go away, but they made fewer of them, deployed fewer of them in a process that was envisaged by the strategists. Build trust, reduce them more. Build trust, reduce them more. Build trust, reduce them more. And perhaps, if not eliminate them altogether, reduce them at least to not be an existential threat to humanity, which is what they, wait a moment. And now here we are, with the global economy being unraveled, but small-minded politicians around the world, in democratic and non-democratic societies, the nuclear arms control treaties either all expired, about to expire. I'm with Russia at war. One would hardly expect any further treaties, nor could you imagine either the candidates for President of the United States would have enough political capital to even imagine doing it. So, the global economy under siege. Because we also told you, some of you in long days distant, that there was a challenge of the global economy, that governments would have to facilitate the adaptations of their populations to competition because they had been sheltered from it. So you have to protect the vulnerable in particular from the adverse effects. And that while we lower tariffs, we must also lower industrial subsidies provided by the state, because it's, again, an unlevel playing field. The original free trade agreement in Canada and the United States has a provision that Canada and the United States and Mexico will negotiate a reduction in the subsidies provided by all of their governments. That was a long time ago. Nothing's happened. The subsidies are higher than they ever were. Watch governments bribe companies to build lithium battery factories. China has cheated with industrial subsidies since day one. Wasn't supposed to. And there was no one to say, oh, please stop doing it. Because then, of course, China would have said, you stop doing it too. A little hard to, then we got stuck in this, well, we'll both stop doing it together. Of course, nobody stops doing it together. So the public sees the disadvantages of a global economy, no benefits, although there are benefits. Political support erodes, public ignorance rises, nuclear arsenal is as bad as ever. Mr. Putin is trying to recreate the Soviet empire. China sees geopolitical advantage. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen, in a dangerous world. I'm sorry, it's a dangerous world. There's no other way to describe it. It's a dangerous world. What's the outlook for the global economy? No immediate emergency faces us. So, fair outlook. Europe's not about to collapse, even though their unstrategic politicians made themselves dependent on the reliability of stable Russian political environment. Germany's government is basically now so paralyzed that their economy is in recession, and mighty German manufacturing is now terrified of Chinese cars. That's their whole thought now. Oh, Chinese cars coming. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So, There you go. So fair outlook, no collapsing, fair outlook around the world, but fragile. Fragile as all get out. And then there's the election of the United States, which runs the risk of taking a fragile situation and making it worse. One of the candidates is an old man whose last new thought was in 1980, who is statistically unlikely to survive to the end of the term for which he is running. He's older than I am. And that's like, sorry, that's saying a lot. And then there's the other candidate. Mr. Biden at least has the advantage of being, not to the electors anyways, at least rational. Then there's the other one. I shall not speak his name. So great is his shame, and so sweet is the sound of that name to himself. And this sarcastic, unhinged, ignorant person. Larry's 23,000 students have been, well, almost 24,000, have been placed very strategically around the world. So the CIA would kill for my intelligence network. Because, of course, I have spies at CSIS as well. And I placed one of my spies in he who shall not be named in his personal office while he was still being a celebrity television star. And the only thing that I could say about him that's positive is he is authentic. He is what he appears to be. It isn't an act. He is actually an arrogant, self-interested son of a bitch of a disgusting person. And I have a picture of him with my spy in his corporate jet, which will one day go on display in the Museum of Infamy. So the situation could get much worse. It is possible that when the day after the election in November, nobody will know who the government of the United States is, since most of the parties will likely be in court. If it's a near-run thing, it'll all just go to the judges. And that will be a pretty sight. And then, of course, the government of the United States will drift, and of course, if Congress has got different parties, it is hard to see an optimistic scenario there. So, now the question becomes, well, you know what the question is, you pack of engineers, you. Will technology save us? Will technology save us, or will it destroy us? Well, I'm sorry, that's the argument. There it is on the screen. Look, sorry, no, wait, hang on, wait a moment, wait. I got myself carried. See, sorry, I have one more chart to show you. Because I've shown you this chart for many, many years, and I want to show it to you just to update you on the Canadian economy. So, thank you. While our growth is slow, our employment growth remains the envy of the world. Now, US employment growth has also been strong, but that's the number of people working in the country. It's at a historic high. Excuse me. That ends in, February because of some glitch in StatCan's software that interfered with my ability to download. I actually now can download real charts. As you can see, this is not one photocopied and glued together, because I move with the times. I'm at about 2010 right now. In any event, last month, so the March figures are on the screen. The April figures add another 90,000. So historic high number of people working, so that actually is a positive indicator. So notwithstanding the slow growth, the employment has risen, and GDP per person has actually fallen. So that's a productivity challenge to us. So now, to the technology, There are two ways to look at this technology. As I indicated, this is not new. This is not a new issue. That's the copy out of the course notes. Just raise this slightly. There's the date, 96. So, you know, what's new? Well, what's new is that maybe the tech is ready to deliver the promise, the threat of those cartoons. So, not a new idea. Just that has the moment come. Larry, who fell in love with robotics in the movie called Forbidden Planet, one of the great science fiction movies, and actually ushered in real science fiction movies post-World War II, fell in love with them then, and has been waiting for the robot revolution ever since. Much hyped. Where is it? It's always tomorrow. Like, really tomorrow. Like, just tomorrow. Then tomorrow keeps shrinking into the ever-distant horizon. But now the gurus of AI, those people who've actually had a hand in creating it, tell you the moment has arrived. It's here. Ask Sam. Sam knows. Sam Altman, of course. Sam knows. A number of the gurus have said the same thing. We are maybe a decade away from a general intelligence AI machine that will exceed human intelligence. So, worrying about, you know, bombs and things, worry about the fact that you have no economic justification. And those who believe that humanity is now at risk of the machines doing what that cartoon implies. That we're out of luck. The machines are better than us. Since the people who make this argument have credentials, have accomplishments, not the least of which is something like ChatGPT and their equivalents. So, one would not casually dismiss this, except for one thing, one very simple observation. The people who are making this argument are, to a person, not counting the amateurs, are to a person experts in computer science. And everyone knows, if you're an expert in computer science, this makes you one of the smartest people on earth. Allowing you to comment on any other non-technical subject because your technical command is so great. He said in a room of engineers who may be flirting with the same argument, with the same idea in their head. You know, I've watched generations of you being, you know, initiated into the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Waterloo, and we do not say to the engineers coming in, all those young men and women, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, that, you know, this is a career that will, you know, have some modest stuff. This is a career that will allow you to be a leader in the country. Don't look at me like you didn't hear that argument before. I've been here a long time, so don't try to scam me. I've heard it all. So now, so then the question becomes, a very simple question, is it not? What is the credibility of someone commenting on a subject outside their area of expertise? Well, why would a computer scientist trying to predict the future of work, future of humanity, future of human intelligence, comparison to the machines, like why would that be, how are they off their domain? Well, because there are 3 academic disciplines that we teach in this university which takes issue with this argument. Now, I would be persuaded if the gurus of AI, when making these apocalyptic visions of our, the machine was soon going to rival your intelligence, if in fact they say, well, we know that there are 3 conflicting arguments, 3 contrary arguments to what I've just said. I mean, just because there's 3 arguments against doesn't mean you're still not true. Truth is not a matter of like majority rule. But at the very least, when there are 3 credible disciplines that say to you, your argument is wrong, then it's incumbent on you, since you're making the argument rather apocalyptically, like stand on the street corner and shout, apocalypse, apocalypse coming tomorrow, like there is some obligation to actually offer to say, well, yes, and the other guys are wrong. Here's why, right? Yes, here, look like you're agreeing with me, ladies and gentlemen. Otherwise, you rip my heart out, really. I mean, we have to have, let's hold on to, look, in all this chaos, in all this danger, let us hold on to logic and evidence. It's the only thing we can hold on to. Please, please. So yes, the only trouble is, no such argument has been advanced by the people making these apocalyptic visions. So just to do it quickly, what are the contrary arguments? Well, first, there is one in mathematics. Like, I don't know, mathematics does seem to be like a rather relevant subject to challenging artificial intelligence as the machines are now currently designed. We're not talking about some spooky new thing developed. We're talking about generative AI, which of course isn't actually properly named. We'll get to the proper name in a moment. And mathematics says, well, yes, except that it's a system in which nothing comes out that doesn't go in, so that there's no net, there's no net effect. It's also a philosophical question as well. So philosophers actually have dealt with this, and the only difficulty is a really philosophical question: are you more than a meat machine? And if you're just a meat machine, then we can reproduce you with a machine. But there's a whole set of philosophical arguments that say you are more than a meat machine, and we have evidence and logic to suggest that that is true. So, for example, psychology, which also draws out all this, does not have an operational definition of human intelligence. Like the IQ tests, whatever they do, they're not measuring intelligence. They're measuring your ability actually to pass exams. And I've taught enough students to know that passing an exam does not prove intelligence. Even my exams. So that's an important issue. There's a mathematical argument against it. It doesn't mean the mathematical argument is correct, but I want you to tell me, if you're going to tell me the machine's going to rival me, that you've addressed the mathematical concern and that you have a definition, an operational definition of intelligence, which psychology has not been able to find yet, that you can prove. And therefore, we've defined human intelligence, we defined machine intelligence, and then we could actually, do a comparison based on evidence. Evidence, ladies and gentlemen, evidence. We want evidence. Like, I am not, there are times where, given the stupidity of humanity, I'm for the machines. But that has nothing to do with whether that's a logical possibility or not. Quantum physics, which really has also something to say about it. Like no quantum physics, no computers, no transistors, no chips, no phones, no phones. So like really, they're gone, like gone. So let us, if we can't trust our phone, then we should trust the science behind our phone, which is quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and quantum physics. You can read a book called Quantum Enigma, actually calls that whole question, calls that into question as well, because it points out that human intelligence, to the extent that we can figure out what it is almost certainly a quanta effect rather than a calculation effect. So if you're a quanta thing, then all of the AI has nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you at all. Because effectively, these engines as they exist now, you can call them generative AI if you want, but they're actually derivative AI. They derive their conclusions from past information. Doesn't make them not useful. Actually makes them quite useful. Properly trained, you have all the constraints. We're not talking about this as a useful tool. I'm talking about whether it's about to replace you. Entirely different argument. We'll get to what it's actually going to do in the economy in a moment. But rest easy. Put your heart at ease. You are not about to become obsolete. Yes, no, not yet. I didn't say forever. But I'm talking about the AI which currently exists and its further development. I've read about its further development is just to improve the fact that it's a probability matching machine. No, the probability of words following each other, and if there's a big enough data set, it makes perfect sense that it can sound intelligent. It can sound like you, because you speak, and you do speak with, habit of language. It can learn habit of language. It's like nothing surprising about its conversational tone. Nothing surprising about the fact that it can look up information. That's why Google is so excited for this potential opportunity, or so it thinks. but it has nothing to do with the heart of the matter of intelligence. Whoa. And now you see there's a young face here. I like the fact that there's at least one well, there's two young faces. well, just, you know, it's encouraging that they're young faces, because they're going to know that I'm right. Because they're going to live in the future, and they will discover I'm right. For some of you, you know, I'll be in heaven waiting for you. And I even think in the other world, my ability to say, I told you so, will be really sweet words. But any good teacher knows, with respect to AI, that if I were trying to help these two young faces be intellectual, wield their minds to high purpose, exhibit, quote, intelligent behavior, what would I do? We know, well, the philosophers have told us, this is not some secret. The philosophers would tell you, learn how to ask the best possible questions. And our little human intelligence thing there answers questions, but has no foundation for asking them. Now, you can ask it to ask you a question, but it's just going to ask you the same question everyone else asked. A philosopher would tell you that you can change the world by asking a question nobody else has asked. You'll find things nobody else will find. You'll come to conclusions nobody else knows. That's called advancing knowledge. That's called development. And these engines might help you find solutions, might help you find answers, but it cannot find the question. So, it's more, again, and the AI gurus have not addressed these points at all. None of them. The quantum one, the mathematical one, the philosophical one, or this one, about asking questions. Every person who's ever supervised a doctoral student on this campus will say that the thing they struggle with at this highest degree is getting the doctoral candidate to ask more than a pedestrian question. I know you want a degree, man, but for goodness sakes, I've heard that question 412 times and will not suit us for a degree. So then you come back with a tweaked question, which just sneaks in under the wire. Okay, well, nobody's asked whether that applies in Afghanistan. So we'll give you a PhD if you try. What is that? But this is still a useful tool. I'm sorry, I did not change my mind that it's a useful tool. I'm simply saying, let us see what it is, stop panicking about it, and see where it might be useful to us as individuals, or in terms of our workplace, or in terms of school. Because UW is trying to figure out how we can use artificial intelligence to improve our teaching. We do like to improve our teaching on occasion. So, what's its great utility? Which will help us understand the magnitude of the effect. Because one of the things you will hear about the stock market, I haven't forgotten my economics, about the stock market prices, is because, yes, earnings are going to grow significantly, like as the market is currently anticipating, because there's going to be a boom of productivity from artificial intelligence. So this technology, never mind apocalyptic visions, is going to be one of the world's most powerful productivity tools, which directly stimulates economic activity, eases inflationary pressures, contributes to profitability, and your investment portfolio. Say we're all in favor of this. Except, of course, there's a big except. A famous commentator once described, and he was talking about the general effect of computing on the economy. You can see the effect of computing on society everywhere except in the statistics. So now, that this is going to help people do their job more effectively, no question. it appears to be exactly what it sounds like it is, a way to ask questions in like normal language and get a coherent answer, occasionally completely made up. But they are working on ways to fix that. So that is not the most compelling obstacle. It's just something that needs to be addressed. It is being addressed. There are a variety of ways to address it. And I have confidence in the pointy-headed computer guys. I do not doubt they'll get that fixed, right? So that's okay. The only question as an economist, I then say to myself, okay, now, how many people, as part of their work, look for answers? Like, how much of part of their work is asking questions, getting answers, asking more questions, getting answers? Like, in other words, how many people are researchers? Well, that would be me. There's a handful of me's in the country. Most people do not full-time do research. They do, like, work. And they occasionally ask questions, you know, and you get answers that are useful. So I am inept in the extreme when it comes to mechanical stuff. And my Dyson vacuum cleaner wasn't working. It was pissing me off royally, because any time a machine doesn't work, I get very annoyed. And naturally, courtesy of my students explaining what I need to do, I went and asked Mother Google's YouTube for a tutorial on my Dyson problem. 2 minutes, it's fixed. I fixed it with this damn screwdriver and one little tweak. Oh, it's running again. I'm sorry, that's useful. It's useful in our lives. So ChatGPT and its equivalents might well be useful for you trying to find out how to buy something, do something, build something, make something. Doesn't exactly affect the quality of your life. Doesn't exactly cause economic activity to surge. Otherwise, I might have bought a new vacuum cleaner. See, so I didn't. That stimulated no economic activity whatsoever. So you see, the thing it's best at now as a tool will help in pharmaceutical drug research, no doubt, help in medical research, a whole bunch of fields where it has a potential high possibility impact, but not directly on productivity, not directly on growth. I mean, it would be wonderful it helps identify an anti-cancer therapy. That would be brilliant contribution to humanity. Doesn't exactly do a huge amount for the economy in any kind of a short-term 5 to 10-year range, right? It'll keep more people alive longer, which is wonderful, but it doesn't immediately cause a boom in economic activity that the stock market is lusting for. So I'm trying to understand how AI, so it's going to, there's a lot of useful things, some long-term benefit, some short-term benefit, but the short-term benefit is relatively modest. Now then there is the other, one of their other great applications, a la robotics. So a general-purpose robot, not available because we don't have a general-purpose intelligence yet. But more sophisticated robots based on improved AI, most certainly we have. One of their most useful applications, socially advantageous and economically necessary, is healthcare workers for us old folk. I get to say it. A few of you get to say it too. That person doesn't get to say it. On principle, you don't get to say that, but I do. And the simple fact of the matter is there's so many of us old guys, generic, men and women. Besides, there are more old women than there are old men because it's just biologically the case that if you're a woman and you have a partner, there are only 2 statistical outcomes. You bury them or divorce them. Sorry, those are the only... Oh, well, and so thank God for women. Otherwise, there'd be no babies. If men had to have babies, their birth rate would be worse than it is now. Women are tough. They can look at you and think, I'll bury you or get rid of you if I don't like you. So in the healthcare field, there's an acute shortage of workers for the elderly, personal support workers, healthcare workers, nurses. So my goodness, if we have robotics that will tangibly help healthcare and geriatric care for the elderly, disaster? First, it has almost no effect in the labor market because there's a shortage of people anyways, so the machines are replacing the not people. Remember the not babies? There aren't enough babies to begin with. So I'm trying to see economic apocalypse here. Not from the healthcare field, not from healthcare applications for robotics, not from search applications for robotics, useful though both of these things are. I see a useful tool that's going to improve quality of life, some aspects of high-profile research, healthcare, the dissemination of misinformation, which would detract from any positive effects that would otherwise result. That's still fantasy, and maybe fantasy forever, if the mathists, philosophers, and physicists are right, but useful tools, nevertheless. So, what does the future hold for us, whether a lot of future or little? What should our stance be in this world of danger and fragile economic activity? Seems to me, ladies and gentlemen, there are only a couple of responses, one of which is watchfulness. If ever there was a time for watchfulness, it is now. The watcher on the city walls, watching for the barbarians. I know, it sounds like a scenario out of Game of Thrones, but rather appropriate to our world. Watchfulness. There is also one other potential game changer development that some of us may see that has nothing to do with AI, but has to do with the marketplace for ideas. For a long period of time, whole branches of science and economics have been trapped in an old mindset. In a presentation I did at the Sunnybrook Medical, I get around, so I presented to the Sunnybrook Health Research Institutes, with primary teaching hospitals in Toronto, for both their PhD, masters, and senior faculty members on how to innovate in medical care and medical research. And we pointed out that there are all sorts of assumptions in many branches of science that have never been tested. There was no need to test them. Everything was booming. No boom anymore. One wonders, just one wonders, whether those grand assumptions that constrain, for example, medical research. All medical researchers know, and not a single person in a room of 200 people denied it, that all medical researchers know that medical research advances at a glacial speed because biology is so much more complicated than theoretical physics. Really? Really? And the question becomes philosophically, does medical research advance so slowly because the researchers ask such small questions? And if they asked bigger questions, would they get bigger answers? So, interestingly enough, it speaks to the place I've called my home for a long time, the academy. To what extent do we ask our students? Ask the most radical question. Or do we say to our students, ask a little modest question they will get us a publication and you a guaranteed degree. Ladies and gentlemen, those conservative days may be coming to an end for the simple reason that they will not meet society's needs. Slow and evolutionary has worked for quite a while. Look at your world and tell me it's still working. Look at your world where the nuclear threat is as bad as ever. Look at your world where we still don't feed every person on the planet. Look at your world where there are still people tortured in basements. Look at your world. I don't think we should be satisfied with the methods we've used to get where we are here. So, you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's a simple question. Now, the radical days await us. And are those young faces going to ask radical questions that us old guys were afraid to ask, or thought we couldn't ask, or wondered if we should ask them? Never let a good crisis go to waste. It will be interesting to see whether the pressures of our world today cause us to do no longer business as normal in the private sector, in the public sector, in the academy. I spent the last 18 months working with the Government of Canada, helping public servants become innovative. And that's not an oxymoron. No. It's a high mountain to climb. But they want to climb it. And if something as inherently conservative as a 300,000 person bureaucracy thinks they need to be innovative and do new things, perhaps we're moving into a really different world than the one we currently inhabit. Watchful, ladies and gentlemen, watchfulness, and this above all things, guard the independence of your mind from the sources of misinformation which rise in volume from the narrow-minded, self-interested, vested trolls, scammers, corrupt politicians around the world. The independence of your mind is your greatest resource. And the battle for it, never more severe than it is now, but never more important than at this moment in 2024. As some of you who've encountered me before know, under no set of circumstances, well, I wish you or us luck. Luck is what you wish the idiots of the world, because only luck will save them from their stupidity. For the historic times in which we live, I wish us all success. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.